Today is April 25th, 2017. My name is Ryan Downey, and I'm here in Chicago's McCormick's Place Convention Center during the annual meeting of the American Physiological Society. Today I have the pleasure and honor of interviewing Dr. Peter B. for the Society's Living History Project. Dr. B is a longstanding member of the APS and has most recently affiliated with the University of Southern Denmark in Odense. Dr. B's research has focused on the interaction between body fluid regulation and blood pressure control in conscious animals, normal man, and patients with essential hypertension. Peter, welcome to the Living History Project, and thank you for agreeing to be part of this. If you're ready, I'd like to ask you a few questions about your career.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Peter, you were born in Bogen, Denmark. Can you tell me about your family and your childhood in Roding? How did you become interested in science?
I think it's part of it's related to my family history. My family was very middle class Danish family at the time. My father was a bookkeeper and my mother was a school teacher. But I had a younger brother who actually contracted a disease, a brain tumor, which while I was 5-6 years old. And this was a protracted course, eventually leading to his death, which was very traumatic to my family. I see that as one of the reasons that I chose to go into medicine, and it was also so that my another younger brother, also became an MD. So I think that these traumatic medical experiences in my childhood actually kind of programmed me for a career in medicine, and then eventually it turned out to be in science.
Okay. Really interesting. After gymnasium or high school in Copenhagen, you went to the University of Copenhagen for medical school. While there, you received a student research fellowship. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I finished my preclinical part of my medical study with relatively high marks, and was picked by the professors to be a student instructor shortly afterwards. And that really created the relationship between me and several professors, of which one offered me what at the time was a very popular student scholarship, student research scholarship. So you had kind of leave of absence from your study, but you went into the lab. And these were 12 months scholarships. So I took off a year from the medical school and went into a physiology lab to do science. That eventually was very unusually extended by another 6 months. That never happened, but it happened to me. I was very grateful for that because it made me choose between science and clinical medicine on a more informed basis, so to speak.
So you did finish your MD degree in 1969, and then you did a medical residency before you accepted a position as assistant professor of physiology in Copenhagen. Can you tell us a little bit about that decision to?
Yeah, I think that was a consequence of my insight into clinical medicine and clinical careers at the time, because I felt that conditions were quite harsh. I do not mind work 15, 18 hours in a row, but I do mind then sleeping 2 hours and then to be called upon to wake up to disaster, where your decision, split-second decisions, determine the rest of the life for your patients. and I didn't I didn't really want to take on that responsibility. Maybe it was exaggerated, but that was my experience from the substitute doctor assignments which I have had as a senior student. It was very popular to go to Sweden, remote parts of Sweden, to take 1 or 2 or 3 months as a substitute doctor when being a senior medical student. And I have had several of those, and knew that the Danish system was a very tough system to succeed in, based on these hard conditions. And then I think I have a little bit of a curious engineer in me too, so it ended up with physiology.
All right. Well, while on faculty at the University of Copenhagen, you received a senior training grant that allowed you to travel, visit some foreign laboratories. And so you visited University of Nebraska, University of California at San Francisco. Who were some of the people that you worked with, and what sort of research were you conducting while you were?
That was integrated physiology. At the time, it was Joe Gilmore in Omaha. It was actually a little bit of a coincidence, because I didn't really nurture personal contacts at the time, and my professor was not really very much in favor of me going abroad. And so I went to a meeting in England where I met Joe Gilmore, and we talked about my experiments. I've done a lot of experiments on my own at the time, and published a number of papers as the sole author. And he just ended the discussion before we separated by saying, "Why don't you come over?" And I thought about those words, and could be casual, but it could also maybe develop into something. And I contacted Joe, and I made an application for this 3-year scholarship, which was really full salary for 3 years to go wherever you wanted to go to develop your career. And that was a big advantage for me. And I have enjoyed my stays in the U.S. very much. As you mentioned, I started in Omaha, where I worked at the same level as now colleagues, which have been also prominent in the American Physiological Society. So I had broad contacts there, and while I was there, Ramsey came in from University of California, San Francisco. David Ramsey was a teacher on a PhD course. And I had this chance of moving, so I asked him whether he had a desk and an opportunity to work in his lab, and he certainly had. I mean, who wouldn't say that when you come with your own salary? We moved, the whole family moved from Omaha to San Francisco, and was in San Francisco for a period of time. It has been very important for me to experience the American way of running departments, because it was quite different from the way departments were run in Denmark at the time, where it was very much a flat structure with the individualists working in separately. But in the U.S., the leadership of a department was much more top-heavy than I was used to. But it is very nice to be able to experience various ways of doing things, so you can make your own decisions.
Can you expand a little bit on the research that you were doing and what you were investigating?
I had from the beginning been very much excited by the precision by which the organism maintains fluid balance. And in the first years, I was much concerned with the study of osmoreceptors, because the osmoreceptors control vasopressin release with an extraordinary precision. So that if you go on the street and take a bus full of people and measure their plasma osmolality, it's 283 plus minus 1 or 2. So it's a very, very powerful system. So I was kind of concerned with that for the first decade or so of my career, experimental career. And of course, I could not pursue that in a narrow sense when going abroad, because then you are dependent on the projects which are actually running in the lab you're visiting. But it was related problems to hormone secretion in relation to body fluid balance and to renal function. In Omaha, it was more the circulatory relationship, for instance, orthostatic challenges and cardiovascular and renal adjustments. And in San Francisco, it was more on the hormonal side, focused on vasopressin and renin.
All right, so you had the chance to travel. You returned to the University of Copenhagen, and then in 1998, you departed to become professor of physiology at the University of Southern Denmark. Can you tell us about that move and some of the things that you've accomplished while at USD?
Yeah, I think that it was a situation where in Copenhagen, I had risen to a position where there was not very much, which is in Denmark it's a docent. It's a completely different thing from over here, because a docent in Denmark is a senior associate professor. So there's a level between associate and full professor called a docent, a senior associate professor. I had risen to that, and there was not really anything on the horizon indicating that I could have a full professorship in Copenhagen. And then Odense is an hour and a quarter away by train, so it's not that difficult to get there. So I was actually called upon by the University of Southern Denmark to whether I would accept a position as full professor in Odense, and I accepted that.
So as you reflect on your career, can you tell us how your research area of expertise has developed, and who were some of the people that influenced that career?
I think that I have been influenced mainly by the people I have worked under in several ways. My first Danish mentor, Niels Anker Thorn, was a meticulously prepared person in almost most aspects of his academic life. He was very much prepared so I learned from him to always be on top of things with respect to preparations for meetings or administrative purposes and so on and so forth. With respect to Joe Gilmore, and Irv Zucker was in that lab too, and it was a new world of integrative physiology, because that was not the prime competence of my Danish environment. But in the US, both in Omaha and in San Francisco, I had the luck to work together with people who were really thinking integratively. And at a very early time, I had taken the decision to either be an integrative physiologist, or what I called at the time a soup cooker, a kind of a in vitro person incubating tissues and chopping up this and that to analyze whatever. And I decided not to be a soup cooker and to be an integrative physiology, also probably influenced by my background as an MD. I was interested in integrative physiology and integrative regulation, and that was really nurtured by the stay in the States with Joe Gilmore mainly being on the cardiovascular renal side, and the San Francisco lab on the hormonal regulatory side, and that shaped kind of my interest for the rest of my career, actually.
Well, you've had a very storied career. Is there something that you might pick out as being your most significant contribution to physiology?
Well, it's always difficult to assess your own achievements. I have had some kind of controversy with different people, because I did not feel that my results, which I stuck by because I knew they were right, but they didn't always kind of fit with other people's views, and therefore some of my career have been focused on very specific experiments to show with a high degree of certainty some basic things. And I think that it's particularly relevant in these days that there is also this focus on the basic issues of regulatory systems in the integrated organism, so that we are not drowning ourselves in details, because there is in many of the presentations beautiful data of kind of details, but it's often difficult for the presenter to put it into a broader perspective in total regulatory physiology. We have been mainly concerned about in the later years about how sodium excretion is regulated without any changes in arterial blood pressure, because the relation between arterial blood pressure and sodium excretion is one of the issues where we have had diverging opinions, and I think that we have now shown clearly that summarizing that on Sunday, which I did, that we have compelling evidence that under normal physiological conditions, sodium excretion can be changed by a factor of 5 to 10 to 15 without any change in arterial blood pressure, and that is not a great discovery, but it is a consistent basic condition under which we have to explain sodium metabolism. And the other thing is that if I should point to another issue, is the quantitative description of a hormonal system which has not been adequately described quantitatively so far. That the renin system we have constructed, our results have resulted in a quantitative approach to the description of the individual parts of the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system, which really, in my eyes, has a great future, both as a quantitative description of a complex system which so far only have been semi-quantitatively described, and also in the context that it could be very applicable to human physiology and particularly pathophysiology. For instance, I can see a future for this quantitative approach to become essential for the diagnosis of hyperaldosteronism. That is, so I think that the focus on some very basic issues in fluid metabolism and the recipe for a quantitative description of a complex hormonal system is probably two of the features which will stand out when everything else is forgotten. There could be these two issues back.
All right. So as I review your CV, I'm impressed with the fact that you've been active participant in a number of societies, often serving as leadership for these different organizations. Can you tell us about some of those leadership roles and the role of activities, how it's played a role in your career?
Yes, I think that has to do a little bit with my feeling of being Danish. Because in Denmark, we are a very small, very homogeneous population who has been sitting on some very flat islands and peninsulas for 1,000 years, where we only have grass and brains. So we have to use our brains to get the most out of the grass, and therefore we have to always be a trading society, and a society which is very directed towards other countries, other ways of doing things, and therefore it's absolutely necessary for us as a country, but I think it's reflected on me too, that we have to be organized in something which is bigger than Denmark, because Denmark is so tiny a thing. I always impress people in Nebraska by saying that the whole of Denmark would fit into a quarter of Nebraska, and that's correct. So it is a small country, but nevertheless we kind of are outgoing, and I've been outgoing in terms of participating in Federation of European Physiology, the Physiological Sciences, in Scandinavian Physiological Society, in other societies, and also been the member of the APS since 1984, something like that. So I think that we have to unite and work on a common purpose in order to get the best out of our trade, and I have always enjoyed this international collaboration.
So, talking about international collaborations, you've also been involved with the European Space Agency and the International Space Station. Can you tell a little bit about what your roles were and some of those experiences?
That was really the effort of Peter Norsk, who is a Danish MD who is now at NASA in Houston. But for many years he was an associate professor in Denmark, interested in space-related issues around cardiovascular and fluid balance problems. He was supported directly by the Danish government, and he organized in collaboration with other people, including me. And therefore I came into really into integrative human physiology via Peter Norsk and developed that as part of my own trade. But as part of that, he had an elaborate setup where he'd studied human beings with these space-related problems, and a natural consequence of that was to become a member of the European Space Agency. They had a life sciences working committee where I then was a member for a number of years, and eventually went into the experimental work on the space. It was on the space station Mir at that time, but it was kind of difficult because. There were some constraints which not always were based on scientific quality and value. So it was kind of an experience which was good as long as it lasted, but there was also reasons not to pursue that indefinitely.
All right. So, what advice would you give to students starting out in the sciences today?
Oh, that depends on their background, actually. I think we have two sets of competences. If you have a PhD background, you may be characterized as vertical competence. You have a lot of insight, but maybe on a little bit narrower area. So you have vertical competence. If you have an MD background, as I have, you are, as a starting point, have a very almost horizontal competence. You know a little bit of a lot of things, but MDs by training may have rather limited insight for scientific work, and therefore I think that either person should try to, within their interest, mimic the other person's capabilities. So if you're an MD and you're interested in a specific area, you should try to nurture your vertical competences to be very informed or collaborate with informed people around your specific interest. If you are a PhD born with a vertical competence, you should seek the collaboration and at least advice of your closest medical colleagues closest to your focus of interest. So I see that I have had very much pleasure of collaborating with 4 or 5 clinical departments for years, and the clinicians are very grateful for collaboration with a scientific person. So I think that the collaboration between specialists, biological specialists on one side and the clinical setting on the other side, is an area where there's room for significant improvement.
So any words that you might have for younger students who are just finishing their primary and secondary education and contemplating this future of maybe going into the sciences?
I think that first of all, you should focus on something which you like, because times will be tough, irrespective of your choice of focus. So you should keep your fun factor high, because otherwise it'll too quickly become a nuisance to go to work on Monday morning. I have had the pleasure and the privilege for many years to be curious every Monday morning, because I have kept focusing on, what should we really get out of this week? And I think that it is very important that you balance, that you focus on something you like, and then you afterwards, as a secondary thing, you focus strategically on something which have a chance of being funded and have a chance of getting good collaboration with other environments. But a high fun factor and a qualified, meticulous work together with other people supplementing your specific strong area or strong capability. That is where the development should go. I think there's so many physiologists which could need a clinical affiliation to set their beautiful data into a more integrated perspective.
All right. Well, on that note, I'd like to thank you for participating in the Society's Living History program. I've truly enjoyed the conversation that we've had and learning a little bit more about your prestigious career. Thank you so much.
Thank you.